the Attorney General Dan Rayfield on our big day here that we had for the state of Oregon in our country, our tariff victory. The Attorney General is going to make some brief remarks about this big win we had today in the Supreme Court, and then we will open it up for questions and some answers from the Attorney General. We're going to do that using the hand raise function. I will moderate that. This is Jenny, by the way. And we'll end this about 2 o'clock. So I will let the Attorney General take it from here.
Well, thank you all for being here. Today's ruling is a big win for Oregonians. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that President Donald Trump's tariffs were indeed unconstitutional. And you think about a year ago, the president started chaotically implementing his tariffs, frankly, on any country and all the countries on our planet. And he was doing it, and he claimed that he could do this for any amount, for any duration, on any country, for any reason. And today, the Supreme Court said, no, that is indeed not the fact, and that those actions were unconstitutional. We, on the other hand, here at the Oregon Department of Justice have been traveling the entire state, and what we've heard in all four corners of the state is exactly the same. The message is consistent, that the cost of these tariffs have impacted absolutely everyone in our communities, from the food that we buy, to the clothes that we wear, to the lights that we turn on our homes. Everyone has been impacted. And in fact, when you look at the economists, you think about the economists from Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, they show that 60 to 80% of these tariffs are indeed passed down to us as Americans, as consumers. These have never been paid by foreign countries. This has never been the case. They have, and they always will be paid by Americans and our businesses. It was even a lie that the President Trump's own lawyers could not keep with a straight face when they told the Supreme Court that up to 70% of the tariffs would be paid by American consumers. Here in Oregon, we've heard stories, and all of you have heard stories, from local pharmacy up in Portland that has fixed reimbursement costs and has the cost of medical supplies increased on a razor-thin margin, threatened the existence of that business. We have a nursery industry, an incredible nursery industry in this state that is the pride of this state. This was like it's the largest nursery industry this side of the Mississippi, where we have trade relationships with Canada, where they were pulling off products off their shelves, destroying relationships that have been built for decades. Even a couple weeks ago, as we were touring a chocolate manufacturing company here in Portland, Ranger Chocolates. This is a group that needs cacao to manufacture chocolate, needs the equipment to do these things. Turns out cacao does not grow in Oregon, and we're subject to tariffs. Again, these are things that are being passed down to us as consumers, and we wouldn't ordinarily think of these things. And that's why this case was so important. And today's decision couldn't come at a more important time. As Americans, as Oregonians, I think where a lot of us are frankly questioning our democratic institutions, today's ruling is a symbol. It is a affirmative ruling that the Constitution, the rule of law, in this country still matters. The president may be an incredibly powerful person, but he does not get to unilaterally sit in his office and raise taxes hidden as tariffs on all Americans. Those things have to be done with public input. They have to be done by a public vote in Congress. Right now, politicians, including the president, should be doing everything in their power to lower the cost of living for Oregonians and Americans, not the opposite. And the president, I'm sure a lot of you have seen today, continues to make remarks that he's going to continue to pursue his tariff agenda. And he can do so, and he can do so lawfully. And we wish him the absolute best of luck as he navigates those statutes. But we will be watching incredibly closely to make sure that he follows the law and he does them as Congress intended, with the sideboards that will protect consumers, with the sideboards that will protect our industries in our country. As we think about this case, I just think Oregonians should be incredibly proud that Oregon led this case on behalf of all Americans in this United States Supreme Court, something we hadn't done in more than a decade. I'm incredibly proud, and everyone should be incredibly proud of the public servants at the Oregon Department of Justice, from the staff to the attorneys that are willing to dedicate countless hours of time on the weekends and the evenings to stand up to one of the most powerful men in our country. So just want to say thank you to all the people at the Oregon Department of Justice, and thank you for Oregonians for putting your trust in our agency.
Okay, with that, we want to turn it over to some questions. Matthew Kish with the Oregonian has the first question. Matthew, it looks like your audio is muted.
Sorry. The ruling, as I understand it, is silent on the question of refunds. Does that now kick back to the appellate level? Will your office stay involved in the dispute about refunds and how those might work?
Yeah, and this was a ruling on the merits of the case, and you're right, it was silence on the concept of refunds. One of the things that people can take heart in is that the federal government, as these cases were continuing to move along, so you got to remember, we've had 3 rulings in our favor, and the lower 2 rulings at those lower courts, the federal government said, let's pause, let's issue a stay on those rulings, i.e. they would not have to go to the remedy and pay back those unconstitutional tariffs. In the briefings that the federal government filed, they said that we are okay with implementing a stay because we will refund people, and we will refund those folks, the plaintiffs, with interest. And so that is a relief that I imagine a lot of folks are going to be seeking. And it's pretty simple, right? If you think about the pattern and history of this case, President Trump's own lawyers likely told him these actions were unconstitutional. He moved forward anyway, taking those risks under his own responsibility. When the lower court unanimously said these are unconstitutional, he kept plowing ahead again, knowing a high risk that what he was doing was unconstitutional. And the appellate courts did it again, kept moving forward. And so he's created a mess for himself by continuing to delay and actually not change course along the way. So I do expect the federal government to take responsibility for this as this moves forward, as we would expect anyone that moves forward and causes people harm. They need to make it right.
Thank you.
Okay, Billy from KVAL has the next question.
Hopefully you can hear me okay. Following today's ruling, President Trump mentioned that he was placing a new 10% global tariff. I wanted to ask you, do you plan on challenging that new 10% global tariff?
One of the things that we've learned over the last year is that President Trump says a lot of things. Some of the things he does, some of the things he doesn't do. Some of the things he says, he then does them, but he does them a different way than what he said. So we're going to be watching what he said very carefully. And he said he's going to use a provision, it's called Section 122. The maximum threshold that you can implement tariffs is 15%. And it can only be for serious balance of payment issues or if the value of the dollar is threatened. So we'll likely see what he's going to do next Monday, and you can only do that for 150 days, and then it must stop unless Congress continues to act. So it's a vastly different tool. It's a tool that is substantially lower than if you can remember all of the tariffs that were being implemented, in excess of 100% at times. So we're going to be watching that incredibly closely when it hits on Monday. In the moment that the president steps outside of his lane, if he steps outside of the authority that Congress grants him, you better believe we'll be back in court.
Okay, Jake Holter up next.
We were talking a little bit about the refunds. If it reaches a point where either the president refuses to pay or it's taking too long, does that open up these businesses to file lawsuits that they paid tariffs under what's now been deemed an unconstitutional order?
Absolutely. And so as this progresses, we already have filings from the federal government acknowledging in their stay motions that they will need to repay the unlawful tariffs that have been collected. And remember, these are actually American businesses paying for it. It's an admission by them that we as Americans are paying for this. And what we expect them to do is set up a process whereby refunds could possibly happen. There's a handful of different ways that the administration could choose to do that. And obviously, we would trust their judgment on what is the most efficient way to get back any funds spent on tariffs by all Americans and businesses.
All right, I don't see any hands raised. Oh, Matthew Kish, another question.
Sorry, one more. The president had a press conference this morning, and he frankly was pretty bullish on his ability to continue to enforce tariffs, just in a different way. It seems like what you're saying is the president is more restricted now in his ability to enforce tariffs. Like, how would you characterize the powers of the presidency to enforce tariffs now?
First, we always have to look at the statements that come out of the president's mouth. He was very bullish after a really bad Supreme Court showing in this case. He says things. What I can tell you factually, that by the absolute definitions set forth in the statutes, his powers are absolutely cabined and much smaller than they would have been had the Supreme Court ruling not gone his way. Specifically on Section 122, it's capped at 15%, and it can only be for certain purposes, right? Balance of trade issues, strength of the dollar, and the other issue, you can't extend it beyond 150 days. Very different set of circumstances. Absolutely a much more tailored approach, because that's what Congress wanted. Congress wanted the president to be able to react in the moment, but then pause and then allow Congress to come in and say, is this the long-term policy, trade policy that we want to have as a country? And so that's the spirit of a lot of these statutes. Some of the other statutes actually require investigations and fact-finding before you can implement tariffs. Again, good policy where we're tying tariffs to a real problem we're facing, not just the whims of a president who gets grumpy because of something he saw on Twitter.
Thank you.
Joey Vaca with Coin 6.
Yeah, you mentioned, the president very vocal about still wanting to have tariffs in place going forward, and you mentioned you invite him to do so lawfully. Based off of what you've seen from the administration so far, in particular with tariffs, what do you expect to see from the administration if he's talking about wanting to continue tariffs going forward?
Well, it's very unique. One of the tariff, sections that he's looking at is Section 122. We talked about that a little bit. That's a section that has not been used by any other president as well. So there's not a lot of law on that issue, but it is very confined. I do anticipate that they will try and save face and try and use some of these other statutes, which really don't have the broad sweeping powers that the president has been using for the last year. And again, it's one of those things. Hopefully he uses those statutes. Hopefully he uses his powers as granted to him by Congress. We'll be keeping an eye on him. The moment he steps out of line, we'll be there to push him back in within those lines. One of the unique things that always chimes in the back of my head is how this president has operated in all of these other cases. Sometimes he tries to be creative and legally very whimsical in how he interprets courts. And you remember in the National Guard case where they said you can't deploy the National Guard in Oregon. Well, what did he do? He went to California and Texas and tried to deploy those National Guards. And again, the courts slapped him down. So this is the type of tone and tenor that you're experiencing out of the Trump administration. It's not one that respects the courts. You heard that today in the way that he was talking about U.S. Supreme Court justices. Justices, I remind you, that he appointed. Absolutely wild where we're at in today, where he expects loyalties from judges that are designed to be independent from political influence.
Okay, Billy with K-Val again has another question.
Hi there, one more question. Following today's ruling, I just wanted to get your perspective on the Supreme Court upholding the law going forward, specifically as it pertains to Oregonians.
Say that again. I missed it.
Oh, I'm sorry. My mic is not fantastic today. Following today's ruling, do you have faith in the Supreme Court to uphold the law?
I will tell you one of the most humbling experiences I've had in my entire legal career, and frankly, some of my most professional career, is when I sat in that Supreme Court and I heard those justices talk about how important this case was when it came to having three co-equal branches of government. It was incredibly heartening to hear that live and active debate going on, and this was a real consideration. And I believe today is a decision that should give people a little bit of hope, right? That the rule of law and the Constitution matters in this country. And so absolutely, yes, this is a great first step forward. Now, does that mean I'm going to like all of their decisions going forward? Absolutely not, right? I've disagreed with decisions that they've had in the past. I've liked decisions they've had in the past, and the same is going to be true moving forward from today. Our job is to make sure that we get in front of them with the right facts, and so that the application of the law can be applied steadily. But that doesn't mean we're going to like all of the decisions that come out.
Joey Vaca has another question with coin.
Your reaction to the ruling this morning, you mentioned you were going back home. What were you up to when this happened?
Oh, I had just been with all of our Democratic attorneys general at a conference where we were talking about kind of next steps for this next year and how we're working together. And frankly, talking about things like consumer protection, right? How do we stand up for working families? How do we continue to push antitrust work when the federal government is retreating from antitrust? This is a real big issue that we're seeing here. When we're trying to keep the prices down for everybody in our stores, we need to make sure that these laws are being enforced. So getting together, talking about our collective resources and where we can make the biggest impact for Americans.
Billy with KVAL.
Sorry, one more question from me. How do you anticipate today's ruling to impact local Oregon businesses that export, the majority of their business is exports to other countries?
This is the first step as a nation as we start to rebuild some of those essential trade networks that have been established. You're seeing it right now nationally where countries are actually excluding America and they're looking for more favorable trade deals that don't involve us. We need to be more proactive in our trade policy. This is a great first step as we start to emerge from kind of these draconian tariff policies. And so that's what I hope. And I hope over time it will start to provide some relief to businesses. Some businesses are going to see immediate relief, right? Some of our businesses, whether you're in the food industry, if you're a restaurant where you can only get certain foodstuffs from overseas, that stuff will happen more immediately. Other businesses, it will trickle down. So those are the things I do expect to see. And for us as consumers, just as the tariffs ramped up over time and we saw the slowly ramping up of prices, I hope that will be the exact same thing that will happen as the prices go down. Now, obviously, we as consumers want to make sure that as the prices to go down, that we do as consumers see that relief. What we don't want to see is those corporations retain those profit margins as their costs go down.
All right. Anyone have any final questions? I don't see any hands raised. Going once, going twice. Okay. All right. Well, we can conclude our press conference a little early then. Thanks all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, there we go. Hearing from Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield about that, about the tariffs. A lot discussed there, and it seems that there's a lot that remains to be seen as far as how this will all play out and what happens next. But the bottom line, U.S. Supreme Court ruling 6-3 that the previous tariffs that President Trump had applied were unconstitutional. We've got more on this at KPTV.com. You can read extensively about it. We've also got other interviews, and we'll have plenty more coverage of this as well throughout the day. We're going to switch gears just a little bit coming up here in the next few minutes or so. We're going to speak to Mount Hood National Forest about the U.S. Forest Service having seasonal jobs that are going to be available. So this is something for if you or anyone you know is looking for something like this, it'll be a really good opportunity to learn more about it, what that entails. They'll be joining us here right at 2 o'clock. And we've got plenty more throughout the afternoon that we'll be covering as well. If there's breaking news, we'll also have that, should that come in. So you never know when that could happen. But we are here for you. We're going to, as I mentioned, we'll take a break. You'll see the content switch for just a minute here. You'll see your live stream switch, but I'll be right back at 2 o'clock with this interview with the U.S. Forest Service. I'm Greg Nibbler. This is Fox 12 Now.